Okay, welcome to this video where we're going to look at one of the issues that's come up with the desktop to web move and a fix for that issue. So in desktop, if you're in accounts payable or if you're in finance and looking at accounts payable transactions, then the go-to standard inquiry is open and historical items for all suppliers. So you might run that directly, or you might run a report that's been created from that base inquiry. A feature of that is that it will show whether the transactions you're looking at are in one of three stages or multiples of these, which is registered, they're invoices that have been registered but are still in workflow, so not yet approved, open items, so invoices that have been approved and are awaiting payment, and C is historical items, so things that have been paid. So you've got your A, B and C. And if a supplier rings up and wants to know where their invoice is at in the process, you might create a search which is based on supplier or invoice number, and you would want potentially all three of those ticked so you could see whereabouts, at what stage that invoice is at. So if I press F7, I'm just going to look up, let's just use F9, F7 there, no. Let's just look up them all. So DTR 2002, so let's just go for DTR 2002. Click on OK, and I can see that, if they wanted to know about invoice number MV1, I can see it's at stage B, so it is an open item ready to be paid, waiting for the next pay run perhaps. So you can see A, B and C, and the reason you can see all those easily is because it has this column, which is the T column, the transaction stage, I guess it might stand for, but it shows your A, B and C. So in web, the similar process would be to go to the relevant object to look up supplier transactions. Let me go over to the web. So if I go to create new report, and the object I need is called supplier transactions, and that does the same job. So it looks for all supplier transactions, in other words, transactions that are on the AP ledger, so just that AP control line. If I scroll down to supplier transactions, there it is. Let's double click. And what we will find is we have, it's been renamed, so A, B and C, what was registered open and historical is now called registered unmatched and matched, but that is still the A, B and C. However, if I tick all three of those and again put in my Dell supplier and view result, I get something very different because I can't tell immediately which one of these is A, B or C, in other words one of those three stages, because there is no column indicating that. Why they've left it out of here, I don't know. It's not in the kind of list of optional columns. It doesn't exist as a column that can be added. So how can we add that column, or how can someone in AP, someone in any organization, add that column to their supplier transactions report to make it useful? And what we did as a workaround was to try and find out something that makes a value in the results that make it stage A, B or C. If this value exists, then it must be a stage A. If this exists, it must be a stage B, and so on. And so what I came up with on here is if I add the pay date to here, so that's in the payment follow-up. Okay, let's have a look at the difference here. So the two main fields that we're interested in are transaction type, which also isn't on there, so let me add that as well. There we go, transaction type and pay date. Right, if I order this by pay date, I'll just click on that header. I've got things without a pay date and things that have got a pay date. All those things that have a pay date are actually stage C. When I say stage C, I mean in web terminology, it's matched. In desktop terminology, it's historical. So things that have been paid, stage C. So I've already got a value that I can indicate to say if this pay date has a date in it, then that is stage C. For the others here, these are either stage A or stage B, and the way I can figure out for that is to say, if I drag transaction type up next to it, if it's at stage A, that means it's been registered. If it's at stage B, it's been posted. In other words, it's been approved or posted directly. The transaction type for registered transactions is different than the transaction given to posted transactions. So while it is in a registered form, and let me just add the transaction type text to this. There we go. It will be of transaction type, for me, for my system, 58. Registration of incoming invoices. So I know that anything with a 58 is stage A registered. Once it gets posted, after it's approved, the process runs to transfer approved transactions to be posted. It will take on one of these other, well, it'll take on 12 in this case. But also manual payments, they're posted directly, and reversals are posted, so we don't need to worry about those. So there we have our A, B, and C. A, transaction type equals 58. B, transaction type doesn't equal 58, and there's no pay date. And C, there is a pay date. So with that in mind, we can now build up an expression to indicate to create a column which has an A, B, and C based on that criteria. All right, I'm going to go to a report I've already made which has this build, and I'll tell you how it works. All right, so welcome back. I've now got the report I created open, and let's talk through the build, or the solution I should say. Now bear in mind, this took a lot of conversation with ChatGPT, telling it what I had, telling it what worked, what didn't work, and the main cause of issues was the pay date. Reason for that is, if I go back to my report here, as we've seen, some things have a pay date and some things are blank, or at least they look blank. But in actual fact, all of these seemingly blank fields, when you export this data, it actually has a value of the 1st of the 2nd, 1900, something like that. So there is actually a value there, you just can't see it, it's displayed as blank. So you can't just say if pay date is not blank, then it equals a C, because in fact none of these are blank. So you have to take into account what the actual data is in the background that it has as like a filler. Clearly, if it sees that date, it will render it to the viewer as blank, but it's not actually blank. So that was the main issue there. The other bits with the transaction type were relatively straightforward. But again, ChatGPT, I told it what I had, told it what I wanted. We went through a number of tests with pay date to try and figure out what to do, and eventually I got the answer I wanted. So super useful. You can see on the right hand side then that I've got this stage. This is what the outcome of this is. This is what we want. If I order it by stage, you can see those at the top are stage A. All of those have transaction type 58. Then we've got some stage B, so there are a variety of transaction types but no pay date. And then stage C, everything with a pay date. Okay, if I subtotal by that, there we go, you can see all my stage A's, my stage B's, and my stage C's. So let's have a look at the setup of that to see what the expression is doing. So if I click on the table customization box at the side and go to expressions, here is my expression. Now let's have a quick closer look at that a bit bigger. So what it's doing is it's saying for each line, if the transaction type equals 58, then give it a value of A. Simple enough. That's the one that's easy. And next thing it says, so if that isn't true, then it says if, and then it uses this year part function. Then it looks at the pay date and looks at 1900. So it basically says if the year part of this date is 1900, okay, and the transaction type does not equal 58, okay, then give it a value of B. In other words, if the pay date equals 1900, that's the ones that are blank essentially, but the transaction type isn't 58, then give it B. So that's all our open items. Finally, if neither of those apply, then give it C, and that's essentially our paid. So it's not 58, it's not blank / 1900, or not equaling 58, it's C. So that is the expression that we've got in here. If I go back to here, you can see that there. Now, interestingly enough, when you do this, when you enter this expression or paste it in, there's a couple of things to be aware of. Firstly, pay date and transaction type. Both of those things are used in this formula. You have to have them there to be able to create the formula and run it for the first time. If you don't have it there, if you just were to paste that in without actually having pay date and or transaction type there, it would give you an error message. But once you first run it and it now understands what those things are, I could actually get rid of pay date and transaction type, and it still knows that I've got stage A, B, and C. It still remembers that pay date exists. It's part of the data set for this particular object, Supplier Transactions, and so it can use it. So as long as you have the column there when you're creating the expression and saving your results and saving your report, you can then, if you didn't want it to be shown, you could then go back and remove it. All right, so that's quite an interesting thing to know. Generally, for expressions, you don't have to have an expression column visible after you first run it. The other thing we've got here is that data type is string. That means it's common text. That's why, because it's A, B, and C. We've got a search criteria, yes. So what I've got there, what that does is it puts that column as a search criteria back on the search criteria page. So over here, I can still have all three of these ticked, but I could say I only want to see things at stage C. View result. Actually, I think it might need to be capitals. Stage C. View result. There we go, and there's all my stage C results. So you can use that expression as your search criteria, kind of almost replacing these if you want to look specifically. I mean, to be fair, if you only want to see stage C, you can just get rid of both of those because you know that matched is stage C. But it allows you to do a filter by stage if you want to. All right, the last thing to note about this in terms of when I was using this with ChatGPT is the first way often of looking for an expression or trying an expression is to copy the information into Excel and then trying an Excel formula to see if you can get the values or information you want in your new column. Then once you know how to do that in Excel, you can try and translate that back into your information browser. But there is a difference, of course, between the syntax and the formulas and the functions, I should say, between Excel and this information browser. So if I go back into expressions, you are limited to the functions and operators and macros, but functions and operators mainly, that are available within your expression setup. So what I did was I copied and pasted all the operators and all the functions into my ChatGPT conversation and said, this is my limit. This is how I did it in Excel. These are the limits I've got in my expression in Unit4 ERP. So can you try and recreate or create the formula given those parameters, given that criteria of only using these operators and functions? And it did the job. One example there is, for example, in Excel, if you need an OR, you can literally type in OR, whereas the operator here is this pipe, which represents OR. You haven't got the AND option, instead you've got the ampersand. So there are differences in the operator. Okay, so something to bear in mind. So use ChatGPT to your advantage. Give it all the information that you have. Tell it what your restrictions are, and it will go through a number of tests with you if it needs to. Tell it what works, tell it what didn't, but usually it manages to get you where you need to go. All right, so finally on here, what I'm going to say is that this works for me because I only have one registration of incoming invoices transaction type. You might have multiple different transaction types for registration, all with that same kind of treatment code that indicates it's for registration of incoming invoices. So what I wanted to do was create a template that I could reuse with other customers, but make it so that it worked regardless of how many transaction types they had. So what I've created is an Excel spreadsheet. Again, ChatGPT helped me with this, and what this does is allows me to put or paste as many transaction types into column A. So I've got IR there, and it gives me the formula for A and B and the eventual complete expression. This is what I need to copy and paste into the system. So let's say I've got 3 different transaction types. I might have IR, I might have IX, and I might have I don't know, MP. Whatever my transaction types are, I can paste them into here and it will build up that list until I've got my whole expression. Then what I need to do, obviously this is a formula, so I just need to copy that cell, paste it in here as a value, and now I can copy and paste that as my expression into Unit4 ERP. Again, making sure to have pay date and transaction type columns included in my report, at least while I'm saving it. Then again, I can get rid of them later. And so that then should work for your A, B, and C. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put a link in the chat to a Dropbox that has this transaction template so that you can then use that if you want to create your own ABC expression in your supplier transactions reports. Create it, save it, and then use that report that has that stage, use that as your template going forward. Use that as the thing that you start from when creating supplier transactions related reports. So I'll put that in the chat. I hope this has been useful. Give us obviously a like and subscribe. Give us an email if you have any other suggestions, and I hope that works out well for you. Thank you very much for watching.